evening, welcome to Central News for Tuesday the 12th of November. I'm Hilary Entwistle. Following ongoing shellfish toxin monitoring, the paralytic shellfish poisoning, PSP, warning has been extended eastwards along the Bay of Plenty coastline. The affected area now includes the entire coastline from Tairoa on the Coromandel Peninsula, south to Waihi Beach, east along the Bay of Plenty coastline to Whakatane, Ohope and Opotiki, and further along to and including Whangaporoa near Cape Runaway in the eastern Bay of Plenty. It also includes all harbours, estuaries and islands along this coastline. Medical Officer of Health Dr Neil DeWitt says ongoing monitoring has shown high levels of paralytic shellfish poison present in shellfish along this coastline. Shellfish in the affected area should not be taken or eaten. Eating shellfish affected by paralytic shellfish toxin can cause numbness and tingling around the mouth, face, hands and feet, difficulty swallowing or breathing, dizziness, double vision, and in severe cases, paralysis and respiratory failure. These symptoms can start as soon as 1 to 2 hours after eating toxic shellfish and usually within 12 hours. Anyone suffering illness after eating shellfish should seek urgent medical attention. Envirohub Bay of Plenty are planning a series of community get-togethers around Tauranga and the Western Bay to connect with local communities and research what participants would like to see happen with their local reserves and public land. This could include anything from removing invasive weeds and restoring native biodiversity through to planting fruit trees and community gardens similar to the Katikati Kaiway. Envirohub Bay of Plenty secured seed funding via the Bay of Plenty Regional Council 2013 annual plan to look into the redevelopment of the urban green space project. The government's decision to lower the blood alcohol limit has been welcomed by the Waikato Regional Council, which has been lobbying hard for change for several years. Regional Council Chairperson Paula Southgate says on average a quarter of the Waikato's fatal and serious injury crashes every year involve alcohol, which is why the council support government dropping the limit. The 2013 to 16 Waikato Regional Road Safety Strategy has a particular focus on alcohol and drug impaired driving, with the Regional Transport Committee agreeing to lobby for a reduced legal blood alcohol limit at every opportunity. Now for our region's weather, and it's looking like it will be the same for both our centres. Hamilton fine with light winds, your expected high is 20 and an overnight low of 6. Tauranga, your Wednesday will be fine with light winds too, your expected high is 21 and an overnight low of 9. Just ahead, the Take a Break campaign. Welcome to Central News on TV Central. The Minister of Labour, Simon Bridges, is proposing employment law change that unions claim is taking away basic human rights. I spoke with the Regional Chair of the PPTA to find out what in the Employment Relations Amendment Bill they are opposed to.
The bill proposes a raft of changes to the Employment Relations Act that would allow employers to refuse to negotiate a collective agreement, pay workers less than their collective rate, deny them rest and meal breaks, and place restrictions on the right to strike. And as teachers in the PPTA, our members actually, because we see families struggling every day, and the proposed change would only make that worse. We see parents, struggling to get their kids to learn. There's been enough initiatives with like the milk thing, for kids who can't get fed in the morning, breakfast and all that sort of stuff. And when you erode workers' rights and the ability to earn a reasonable income and living, those people suffer. And that's why, it's part of our learning community that we're actually very concerned about.
What did you do as part of the Take a Break campaign?
And basically on the 30th of October, they asked everyone to actually have a special morning tea to basically celebrate the fact that we still had a morning tea. And with these proposed changes, that the possibility of actually losing it was a very real possibility, and to celebrate while we can. So we had a morning tea here, lots of bickies. Mind you, we didn't have any sausage rolls this time, but that's okay.
Why have these changes been proposed?
That's a good question, and one really should be asked of the government. The current employment law is very heavily weighted in favour of employers anyway, and these changes only make things worse for the vulnerable workers, you know. For example, like the fact that their 90-day probation period would go, and I can talk a bit more about that later. The threats to collective bargaining, the removal of a right to have a meal break.
How will this bill prevent people's rights to collective bargaining power?
The bill will have major implications for workers to negotiate the collective agreement. It will allow the employer, and now in teachers' cases the Ministry of Education, to stop negotiating during bargaining by removing the duty to actually conclude bargaining. In other words, they can simply walk away from the table and not conclude it, which leaves people, you know, where to go with that, because if they walk away from the table, it allows them to have that ability. It'll remove the protection for new teachers. Currently, when a person's employed, I mean not just for teachers but in any workplace, they are covered by the collective agreement of that particular site for 30 days. So in other words, they effectively have the same rights as every other person who comes onto that site for the first 30 days. And then if they want to, they can decide whether to stay with that union or collective or actually go on an individual and give it away. But it's protection there for those people so they have the same starting point. And if you remove that right, then they won't have that protection. It will allow also employers to arbitrarily deduct 10% of workers' salaries for partial strikes and make it easier to cut their pay and their employment conditions. So if you go on a sort of a little mini strike or, you know, withhold your work for whatever reason, they can just start cutting bits out of your pay.
Why do you believe that a morning tea break is so important?
It's short-sighted of employers and managers to discourage workers from taking a break. Because if you're actually reaching the bottom of your absolute mental capacity because you're so tired, you're not being able to recharge, you end up daydreaming and drifting. Breaks usually involve some sort of movement. You actually get up and move places, which actually also helps to refresh you. And there are some people, you know, who actually often think a little bit better when they're actually on the move somewhere, and you know, between breaks, because apparently Einstein, you know, came up with his relativity theory by riding his bike. He was out riding his bike until something came to him.
Under the proposed law, will you still be able to take a break?
No, it'll become discretionary rather than a right. In the case of schools, it'll be up to the principal to decide if and when a teacher can have a break, but it also means that, you know, good employers will give their staff breaks. But the law is there to provide for everyone, and there are people who will miss out and be under stress and pressure because simply their employer will say you won't have a break, or they'll dictate when those happen. So
potentially people won't be allowed to take a break at all?
That is a possibility, yes.
Simon Bridges said in the campaign, this is a quote, "I think this is silly stuff from the unions who are clearly just trying to justify their union fees."
Well, Mr Bridges is fully entitled to his opinion. I mean, without those health and safety issues being highlighted by the likes of the unions in every worksite, you often end up with tragedies like you did at Pike River, where things went awry because, you know, it just did.
What kind of evidence is there about the productivity when people do take breaks?
If you don't have a break to refresh, then your productivity actually goes down. Because if you're working on the same task for a very long time, you eventually get tighter and tighter. You'll ask anyone who pulls an all-nighter when they're studying, for example. You think you're doing hours of work, but in actual fact, it'll take you an hour to do what you did in 10 minutes because you are that tired, you can't actually function properly. You need time to refresh.
Will the PPTA continue to fight this bill?
That's an emphatic yes. Because the bill will only further reduce pay conditions for New Zealand workers, especially the low paid and the vulnerable. They not only affect our teachers, but as I said, our communities and our students who are part of that community. And it's a union's right to be at the negotiating table and to fight every step of the way to keep workers' rights protected.
You can find out more about the campaign on union.org.nz. Coming up next, a tug of war. Welcome back. Following on the success from last year's Bay of Plenty Tug of War event, it will be held again this year at Fraser Cove on the 22nd of November. I spoke with one of the organisers to find out more.
On the 22nd of November at Fraser Cove here in Tauranga, we're having a tug of war event for local men to show their support for the White Ribbon campaign. There's normally 16 teams competing. Starts with a mayoral invitation team against the White Ribbon Riders, and then there's a competition to find out, who's the best team in Tauranga. Last year the winners were C3 from the Port.
So who's involved with organising the tug of war?
There's a few different agencies. There is the Family Works Northern, which is part of the Presbyterian Support Services Network, the local TMAPS, which is the Tauranga Moana Abuse Prevention Strategy Group, and Fraser Cove Management are the three lead agencies on this, as well as Tauranga Safe Cities.
What is Fraser Cove doing to get behind the campaign?
Well, World's End are our really big supporters. They allow us the use of their sound system and the balcony, and big supporters of the tug of war. Then other shops, for example, Countdown, are putting teams in, and they're also supporting with prizes. So there's actually going to be a young person's basketball event just prior to the tug of war, and they're putting up some prizes for that as well.
Who are the Patriots Motorcycle Club?
Well, the Patriots Motorcycle Club have been long-time supporters of the White Ribbon campaign. They are from a whole variety of backgrounds, but they all come together around the same kaupapa, which is that they want to see our rates of violence against women reduced. So they're an amazing bunch of often rough-looking, rather exciting-looking men who use, I guess, their look and their bikes to bring that message home that that's for every man to be a part of reducing violence against women.
What is the pledge?
The pledge is that you won't condone or support or stay silent about violence against women in any setting.
Do we have a problem with family violence in the Bay?
Yeah, I think we have a significant problem with violence in the Bay and right throughout New Zealand. For example, each week in Tauranga, there's something around about 200 domestic violence incidences. That's over the whole Bay, and about 60% of those involve children, and around about the same figure involve alcohol as well. So, yeah, we have a violence issue, and it's an issue that's happening in homes, and this is one of the ways to get into talking to people about this stuff at home.
How do we stop that attitude of just accepting violence?
Yeah, I think that violence obviously operates at a whole variety of levels. It's how we discipline our kids, it's how we talk to each other, as well as, right to the extreme level of physically abusing, sexually abusing people. So I think that when we understand the broad reach of violence, then you begin to understand the scale of the problem, and it motivates people to do something about it. When we kind of bunch or put violence away as the problem of a few extremists, I guess, people who take extreme actions in homes, then we forget ways that we kind of condone violence right throughout the media and politics and society in general.
How can we see a better example for young men that are growing up now?
Well, the first thing is around the tug of war and these kind of events, the White Ribbon campaign. It's important for men to get involved because that is role modelling, this activism, really, in support of women. I also think that, at this time with the whole palaver around the Roastbusters and how young men are acting, I actually think that criticism and activism and action should be led by men. I think too often we leave it to Women's Refuge, to Shakti, and to Living Without Violence, who are predominantly run by women, to be the activists around violence against women. Actually, men need to be the activists around violence against women.
And it isn't just that stereotypical once we're warriors family, is it, that's involved with family violence?
No, not at all. It happens across all classes, across all types of family makeups, and across all experiences of life. Violence really isn't that worried about what you look like, what colour your skin is, or how many people you've got in your family. There are stressors for people in poverty that mean that violence is more likely to be a risk there, but it's not exclusive to people in poverty. It's common in all neighbourhoods in Tauranga.
What should we do if we are experiencing or we know of a family violence situation?
Well, the first thing I'd say, if you see an act of violence, then remember the police are always available. So often people are a bit loath to ring 111, but actually the police are really responsive around domestic violence in particular, so do ring 111 in that instance. But then outside of those, where the act's actually happening, if you have concerns, there's a whole variety of agencies that you can ring, that you can go and see, that you can get online for different areas, different places, for different areas and places. So I'd really encourage people to go to the whiteribbon.org.nz, and that gives the links to lots of providers, including Tauranga ones, and get to know who the providers are that can support you.
The White Ribbon Pledge is available for anyone to take on White Ribbon's website or their Facebook page. Coming up next, turning wood into craft. If you have just joined us, welcome to Central News. The Tauranga Woodcrafters Guild's annual exhibition is on this weekend, but there is a difference this year.
This is the highlight of our year, really. We put a lot of effort into our show. Roy and his team have put signs all over the town and talked to people like you to get the publicity out there. You can buy your Christmas presents. We've got carving, turning, fretwork, every imaginable thing. One of the highlights has been my canoe in recent years. I've done a lovely Canadian-style canoe that everybody seems to think shows up well. Ivan makes rocking horses. You know those lovely rocking horses with flowing tails and saddles and things? Ivan produces a couple of them every year. So we've got some really interesting stuff.
So you're actually going to be expanding the exhibition this year, though?
Yes, I believe we're bringing in embroiderers and what else, Roy? Stitching people.
Quilting.
When I'm in my shed doing woodwork, my wife calls it my patchwork, and when she's stitching things together to make a quilt, she calls it her patchwork. So, you know, we're allies.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Tauranga Woodcrafters Guild?
We've been here for 21 years, and the club started in 1987. We are basically a bunch of hobby woodcrafters, mostly retired guys looking for something to do, but we've got this class of children coming on. We've got all their mums who are starting to discover things about woodcraft as well. And as I said, we've got these various different disciplines that we work in. We've accumulated all this equipment here over the years, and we're pretty well set up.
But you're actually trying to currently reinvent yourself.
Yes, cometh the bulldozer. This building is condemned, basically. It's not safe earthquake-wise, it's not up to fire standards, and our lease expires in May next year, and the council wants to bulldoze it down. And we have to go somewhere. We've been negotiating 2 years now with the council, and we've finally got a piece of land that we can build on. So now we've got to go to the funding charities and put together a really good story about why we deserve their funding. And they say they're not interested in funding a building just for our 55 club members. We've got to be offering something to the community beyond that. So we're contacting the people at the Mount Maunganui, because this is over that way, Hewlett's Road, who've been talking about a men's shed. And this, if we can embrace the men's shed concept on top of our own club and call it a community workshop, because we've got young ladies and we don't want this gender bias, we can put a good case for funding. We also want to run the equivalent of the old night school that the colleges ran. See, I've got a young lady who came to me a few months ago for help with a router. She's keen on woodwork. She's bought a router. How do I use this thing? I went to the men's shed and I came away in tears, she says. So I showed her how to do the router. And we had a couple of sessions, and she's joined Roy's night school, night class, he calls it, night shift. And she's just rapt. She's having a ball.
And what have you been teaching this class, and has it been a success so far?
Well, the first thing I teach them is make a spinning top. Just a branch off a camellia tree, turn a little spinning top, and then we go on to a mushroom, a Christmas tree, an egg cup. And by the time they've done those, they've got a rough idea of which way they're going to hold the tools. And then they choose their own project and go on from there.
Is wood turning a dying art form?
No, it's not a dying art form. And I do want to emphasise we're not just turners. We have all these other skills as well. No, it's an art that men enjoy because it's practical. It makes a noise, it makes shavings, it gets a bit of attention. I think one of your other questions is, can you make a living as a wood turner these days? That's a lot harder. You've got to be really creative and really artistic to do that. But I know a few who've got into the corporate gift scene, who've got in touch with American collectors, who will produce something when the Prime Minister wants to give something to the Prime Minister of India when he comes, that sort of thing. So there are a few really making it big in the art world. But for the average one of us turning out salad bowls and a few things, we don't actually sell all that many. And personally, I turn a bowl whenever there's another wedding in the family or we need a present for something special.
Now we're with Roy, who's actually going to show us what marquetry is. So what's marquetry?
Right, marquetry is done with a scroll saw, and it's a bit like a jigsaw. You've got to cut every little piece out and then join it together again without seeing any joins. You'll see here they're all different coloured woods, and it's all made in wood. So it takes a lot of stacking the timber together and then cutting out and then getting rid of the bits you don't need and rejoining the pieces you do need, and it all becomes one picture.
So that's all wood?
That's all wood, yes.
Oh, that's amazing. And this is an example of intarsia.
Yes, intarsia, again, you're cutting out all the little pieces and then you're shaping around the edges right around and getting the different depths of the wood so that it looks 3D effect, and again, it's all wood again.
So what kind of skill level does this take?
It's not too bad. That's fairly, you need some good skills for that, but you can do some simplified things as learners and it comes up quite good. We've got a couple of the homeschool children here doing pieces at the moment.
Well, thank you very much and all the best for the exhibition.
The exhibition is on this Friday, Saturday and Sunday, the 15th, 16th and 17th of November at the Mount Sports Centre on Wanganui Road. That is the program for today. Email us or like us on Facebook and let us know if you have any of your own news you would like us to cover. Thanks for joining us. I will be here again tomorrow night with more guests from in and around the regions. I'm Hilary Entwistle. Have a lovely evening.
This has been an Alpha Media production, a division of Television Media Group.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.